A look at the fast-developing world of supply chain finance with Dale Rogers. He is the Semiconductor Professor of Business at Arizona State University. Hello, Dale. Welcome.
Nice to be with you.
For purposes of what's going on today, would you please define for me what the phrase supply chain financing means?
Yes. What it means is you're using the supply chain to fund the organization, and sometimes vice versa. But what that means is, so there's really four basic sources of capital: equity, debt. It's always great to have cash, and then operating capital or supply chain capital. And so if you think about a company like Apple, they have 10 days worth of inventory that they own right now, days of inventory. But do you think they really only have 10 days of inventory? They're getting ready to roll out all new products. No, they have a lot more than that, but they're keeping it at their suppliers. So they're using their suppliers, they're using their supply chain to make Apple look better financially. So the idea is you use the supply chain to fund the organization. A lot of times it's the best capital to fund the growth in the company. And then sometimes where you have a strategic supplier, maybe you do the opposite. But it's really looking at supply chains as not just make, source, deliver, but also to fund.
Clarify for me, though, how you do that. In other words, are they borrowing against the inventory that's in the system? How are they acquiring funds based on that inventory?
Well, what they're doing is they're decreasing their inventories.
Yes.
So they have additional cash. So they're taking cost out.
Taking it off their books.
By keeping it on somebody else's books.
So they haven't taken title to it.
Right.
So it's almost...
And they're not going to pay you very quick.
Right.
They're going to pay you in 120 days.
Right.
And they're not going to have it until they want to have it. So your working capital, if you're doing it right, looks way better than it otherwise would, because you're not keeping inventory. You're also paying slowly, and you want to get paid. You want to reduce your receivables as much as possible. So it's kind of a game, and you can use your suppliers to actually help you be more financially healthy, certainly from a working capital point of view, by transferring stuff onto your suppliers.
But what is the effect on the suppliers?
Well, they do it to the next guy.
They just keep kicking it up in the next tier?
Yeah. I mean, you can't always do that. There are mechanisms. So we call what I was talking about earlier supply chain financing, but there are mechanisms such as supply chain finance or dynamic discounting that can help the suppliers.
Right.
So supply chain finance, what used to be called reverse factoring, is a huge business around the world, where banks or fintech companies will help a supplier get paid earlier for a percentage of the invoice.
So I'm just trying to understand that process that you just described, and then we started out talking about this other thing about using the supply chain to fund the organization. Does that all come under the term of supply chain finance, or are those two separate
supply
things?
Chain financing, yes.
I see. So that's all one big ball.
So you take it out of your supplier's hide, truthfully.
Yeah.
And there's mechanisms to get your suppliers healthy.
I see.
Without you paying them very quickly.
We are hearing lately, though, that suppliers are getting more and more slow paid, that the buyers are not paying their bills on time.
You know, it's interesting. Around 2015, I would say, we saw Procter & Gamble move from 90-day payables to 120 days. And that's sort of become sort of rule for a lot of firms. You can't get too much beyond 120 days. There are industries where, they'll start out negotiating with you at 360 days. That's crazy, but 120 days has kind of become the norm. And maybe someone will try to move it out to 150, but 120 seems like, what used to be 30 days, then went to 60, then 90 is now 120.
Now, I understand, are 3PLs, third-party logistics providers, getting into the act of supply chain financing?
Yes.
And if so, how?
It's interesting. For instance, there's a new 3PL startup in the UK called Beacon, Beacon, and they're a combination fintech, financial technology company, and 3PL. And it's, I think, Jeff Bezos is an investor. Travis Kalanick from Uber is a investor, and you're going to see more and more 3PLs add as a service supply chain financing, I think.
But they can't provide the money themselves.
Well, but fintechs don't have that either.
I see, they're just intermediaries.
Yeah, and what a fintech actually is in many cases is a platform that facilitates, they link to a source of capital. Can be a bank, but it could also be retirement funds or insurance company, and the sources of capital can be used, and it's a pretty good short-term return. So the fintech acts as a middle person between the supplier and the buying company, who's maybe bigger in this case,
I see.
And then a financial source. They act as a platform to help pay the supplier early.
Should we be at all concerned about the proliferation of non-bank sources of supply chain financing? Of course, banks, to a great degree, seem to have just gotten out of the business, it seems like. They're not there like they used to be.
I think there probably does have to be regulation. I don't know if what you're referring to is the Greensill
Well, you
debacle.
Tell me. What are you referring?
Greensill was a company that really imploded earlier this year, and was partly funded by SoftBank, and they really did some unorthodox practices, like discounting invoices when they weren't even really invoices yet. So before they were approved. So it was a that sort of practice should not be allowed. And Greensill, which was a really big supply chain finance company, totally imploded. So there are issues. We don't worry that much about it in the U.S., honestly. In Australia, they're very concerned about this. And they've been the most aggressive of any place in the world at cutting this back. China wasn't thrilled. I don't think it was because of the supply chain financing part, but with Ant Financial, which was going to be an IPO by Alibaba. So there are some concerns. I think we probably will see some regulation in this area.
But we'll see a future where this continues to grow, this sector, I would assume. Supply chain finance in general.
So if you look at in and out transactions, for Citibank, which is the biggest in supply chain finance. You're not going to believe this number, but Citibank's transactions in and out, both directions, 4 trillion a day. 4 trillion a day. That's a number to get your attention.
Yeah.
And if you think about US GDP, about 20 trillion last year, 5 business days, Citibank is doing that in these in and out supply chain finance transactions.
Well, Dale Rogers of Arizona State University, thanks so much for helping us to understand this growing, interesting world of supply chain finance. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks. Nice to be with you.
I've been speaking with Dale Rogers, Arizona State University. Thank you very much for watching.